Welcome to Peak Oil News for June 4th, 2022. Since the 1950s, when the first considerations began that oil might not be an infinite resource, prophets of peak oil have been discussing and theorizing how the depletion of cheap energy resources might present itself. Most tended to believe that we would see more desperate attempts to find energy, greater security issues around existing oil resources, and the depletion of capital flows into oil infrastructure. Remember the list. We will revisit it. Having said that, let's get into the news. The state of Maine has decided to go back to one of the first energy sources man ever realized: wood. A new law was passed by the state's legislature and signed by Governor Janet Mills that encourages the development of wood-fired power plants. These power plants, which would generate electricity and heat for local use, are expected to be proposed and built by forestry-oriented industry that could use the plants to help fuel and heat their operations, as well as selling generated electricity back to the grid. So, for example, a paper mill might burn excess pulp to heat its plant and generate the power necessary to make paper. It's renewable energy that is produced by local loggers and providing jobs for our local community, said James Robbins, president of Robbins Lumber in Seaport, Maine. Some environmental activists are skeptical, however, believing that such plants won't help reduce emissions and will only provide more energy and revenue to extraction-based industries. While people in favor of the wood-burning plan admit that such electricity generation will still release CO2, they say that this CO2 would have been released anyway through decomposition, which cannot be said for fossil fuels. Still, not everyone is convinced. There is significant disagreement on whether it is truly carbon neutral and emission free, said Jeff Marks, Maine director and senior policy advocate for environmental nonprofit the Arcadia Center. Either way, the plan will only generate about 20 megawatts statewide, which is a small fraction of the 3,300 megawatts the state is already generating per year. And in our next story, Iran claims that its seizure of 2 Greek oil tankers in the Persian Gulf is a response to the robbery of Iranian crude. For those of you that haven't heard, there has been another row between the West and Iran after Greek officials seized an oil tanker in their port that contained Iranian oil back in May. It was seized at the request of the United States Treasury because it contained Iranian oil and therefore was in violation of sanctions put on such products. In response, the Iranians have seized 2 Greek oil tankers and said it was in response to the initial seizure. Our oil was stolen off the Greek coast, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said in a televised speech on Saturday. We took back what was stolen from us. Who's the thief? It looks like the ball is back in the West Court. And our last story, Chevron CEO says the United States may never build another refinery. Despite rising prices, it looks like the long-term oil investments, such as refining infrastructure, isn't looking too certain. We haven't had a refinery built in the United States since the 1970s, Chief Executive Officer Mike Rith said in an interview on Bloomberg TV. My personal view is there will never be another new refinery built in the United States. This also comes despite the fact that it is clear to industry observers that even if oil prices drop, the U.S. may not have enough refining capacity to meet petroleum demand, even though profit margins have rocketed up in the face of product scarcity. There is still too much risk for investors to stomach. You're looking at committing capital 10 years out. That will need decades to offer a return for shareholders in a policy environment where governments around the world are saying, we don't want these products, Wirth said. In other words, the official line is that since the United States wants to cut emissions in half by 2030, aka oil use, and be net zero by 2050, who would want to invest in a venture made to produce the forsaken liquid? Of course, I would say this is simply because people in the know that a large, profitable oil industry won't be possible by 2050, not because of policy, but because of physics. All right, and now for a little fun. Let's take one of those quizzes you used to take in high school, where you connect the terms to the story. You have 5 seconds before the key will be revealed. There you go. Thanks for watching.